In this video, we're going to be putting together a small form factor gaming PC capable of running games at 1440p. And for this build, we're actually going to be using the all-new Intel ARC B580 GPU. I've been having a really good time with this GPU, and yeah, for 1440p gaming, coming in with a price point of $249, this could make sense to a lot of people out there. But what I've seen so far and what I've built have been much larger PCs. Now, I love my small form factor Mini ITX builds, so that's exactly what we're going to be throwing together in this video. And when it comes to the CPU choice, this is definitely a bit different from some others out there because this is actually a Mini ITX CPU combo, and with this, we're getting 16 cores, 32 threads. It's Minisforum's brand new BD790i SE. And of course, the main claim to fame for this little gaming PC is going to be the new Intel ARC B580. I've got a lot to cover. We need to put this thing together, but before we get into it, I do want to mention that this video is sponsored by Urcdkeys. I've been using this site for quite some time now. They offer Steam keys, Uplay, Ubisoft, but the main thing I pick up over here are Windows 11 Pro keys. And right now, if you use code ETA, you can get 30% off. So at checkout, we'll just enter the code ETA. That's going to bring the price down to $20.40 for a full Windows 11 Pro key. They're going to email you that key, and then you can activate Windows. Speaking of that, let's head over to a new PC that I recently built. As you can see, we're running Windows 11, and from Settings, we're going to go to Activation Settings. It's going to tell us that we're not active. We don't have a key installed, so we're just going to paste it right in here. Choose Next. It's going to activate Windows for us, and we're ready to go. If you're in need of cheap Windows keys, I'll leave a link in the description, and remember, you can use code ETA for 25% off. These newer Minisforum CPU Mini ITX combos are some of my favorite to build with. I mean, this is offering a lot of power. We've got the Ryzen 9 7948X, and it might sound a little odd because, yeah, that is a laptop CPU, but this offers some absolutely amazing performance. And keep in mind, with a combo like this, you're getting the Mini ITX board, the CPU, and heatsink all in one. You will have to add your own RAM, storage, and GPU. So again, for this setup, we're going with the Intel ARC B580. Great for 1440p gaming, 12 gigs of VRAM, and it's using their new XE2 cores. This little setup from Minisforum uses SODIMM DDR5. I'm going with 32 gigs here. A 1TB Kingston Renegade NVMe SSD, and I also need a cooling fan for the built-in heatsink. I'm just going to be using a 120mm ASUS fan that I had laying around. Once it's all together, it looks a little something like this. Super compact design, after all, it is Mini ITX. And for the case, I went with the cheaper case. I love my cheaper small form factor cases. This is a V100. I'm not exactly sure who makes it, but they do sell it over on Amazon. It's like $35. You can see it is a pretty small unit here, and I'll show you it side by side with my main PC once we're done. And this is not a fancy case whatsoever. This is one of the smallest ones that I could find that would fit a 280mm GPU. It does have a 2.5-inch drive bracket up front that I'm going to totally be removing here because I'm just going to be using M.2 storage. And it only supports an SFX power supply up top. Kind of wish it was on the bottom here, but I think we can make it work just like it sits. Not too bad for the price. I mean, it's definitely going to hold all the components just fine. And when it comes to these all-in-one Mini ITX boards from Minisforum, they're just so easy to build with. I mean, we don't have to do much here. CPU and cooler is pre-installed. We're just going to go ahead and lay the board down in here. My one concern here is going to be heat buildup inside of this case. There's not a lot of ventilation with these cheaper cases, not a lot of design elements, but with this Minisforum board, if you take a look around back, it exhausts most of the heat from that built-in cooler outside of the case. So it's going to pull it in from the top. We've got a fan installed on ours, push it right out of the back. Hopefully it will stay cool enough, and by the end, we'll take a look at the thermals. But the next thing I wanted to talk about here was the power supply. This case only supports an SFX, and I didn't want to go crazy with the price. This is a 500 watt APEVA. I usually use their modular, but this is around $36, so I figured we'd go ahead and install it. And with the B580, they do recommend a 600 watt power supply. 500 watts here is going to be plenty for this build. GPU pulls a maximum of 165 watts, and under extreme loads, this motherboard and CPU combo is going to pull around 145. Last thing we need to do here is install the GPU. And at first, I wasn't sure it was going to fit. Now, on paper, it does say that it'll fit up to a 280mm GPU. That's exactly what we have here with the B580. This is the Intel limited edition version. And yeah, you can slot it right down in here. It actually fits in here much better than I thought it would. And the B580 only needs one 8-pin PCIe connector. We've got that with the lower end power supply that we're using here. And this case does have ventilation on the bottom. It also comes with some rubber feet to kind of keep it up off of the table. I'm going to install those in just a bit. But yeah, I do think it went together really nicely. No RGB. The only kind of lighting we have internally is going to be that Intel ARC logo right on the side of the card. If I had to change one thing, I would probably just splurge and get a modular power supply to keep it a bit cleaner. But with those black cables and everything else being black internally, it doesn't stand out, and I've cleaned these cables up with some zip ties. All that's left to do here is install Windows 11 Pro, get all of my drivers updated, but I did want to give you a little bit of a comparison because I'm not exactly sure how big this case is. There was no information online about the V100, but needless to say, when I compared this to what's been my main PC for the last 3 months, this thing is coming in a lot smaller. First thing I wanted to do is jump into the BIOS and just make sure we've got a few settings here enabled and a couple things disabled. From setup, I'm going to go to Advanced, Onboard Device Settings, and I just want to make sure that resizable bar is enabled. So it does support it, and these Intel ARC cards love it, so we're going to make sure that's turned on. Another thing I want to do here is actually disable the iGPU because I'm not going to be using it. AMD CBS, NBIO Common Options, GFX configuration, and yeah, it was taking 2 gigs of the 32 I have right now, so we're just going to go ahead and disable that. And back to Advanced, AMD CBS, SMU Common Options, and from System Configuration, we're going to leave this at Auto. So it's got a 45 watt, 55, 75 in the Auto mode. Plus, we could set up Smart Shift Control, but at 75 watts, this thing performs great, and it does have a boost up to 100 watts. So we're just going to leave it like that. Resizable bar is enabled. We've disabled the iGPU. Just going to save and exit here, and we'll get right into Windows. Now that we've got the BIOS taken care of, I wanted to jump in here and just give you a look at a couple things. As you can see, we've got that Ryzen 9 7940HX with this Minisforum board, 16 cores, 32 threads. Got 32 gigs of DDR5, and it only runs it up to 5200 in this, even though I've got 5600 megahertz RAM. And of course, the Intel ARC B580 with 12 gigs of VRAM. With Intel launching these new B580 cards, we've got new drivers, and we've also got a new Intel Graphics Software Center. You can see resizable bar is enabled. It'll warn you if it's not. We've got some profiles that we could use here for each of these games. Personally, I don't mess around there. Frame synchronization, FPS limiter, low latency mode, and this is actually really good, especially for FPS games. But performance is where I wanted to go real quick. Tuning, still in beta. Tuning, right up here. It's still in beta, but we've got some GPU tuning, VRAM tuning, and we can mess around with the fan curves if we want to. Basic, one thing that I like to do with these ARC cards is actually up the power limit. 100% right now, we can go to 120%, and for me, that's what I do with these cards, especially in a case like this with not a lot of ventilation. Just kind of wanted to get up there, make sure we can get enough out of this, and I'm going to apply the changes. Now, we can actually take a look at the total TGP on this B580. We're just going to run firm arc. I've got Afterburner right over here, TGP. You can see this goes up to around 165 watts. Now, while gaming, I've noticed we're around 100 watts with the B580. This is really putting some stress on that. But just keep in mind, I mean, it will do up to 165 if you up that power limit. And so far, the system's been working great. One thing I definitely want to do is keep an eye on the temps here. So I've got hardware info running in the background. By the end, we'll take a look at GPU and CPU temps. But now I want to give you a look at a couple benchmarks that I ran. Then we'll get right into some gaming. Give you an idea of CPU performance here. Geekbench 6, single core, 2624, multi, 15614. Definitely putting down some good performance on single and multi. I also ran 3D Mark Time Spy, coming in with a total score of 14,387. I mean, this is a solid score when it comes to Time Spy. But if you take a look at the top, we've got that graphics score, 14,749. And just to give you an idea, same setup here with an RTX 4060, a Zotac 8GB 4060 non-TI, 10,661. So that B580, at least with the synthetics, is definitely coming ahead of the RTX 4060. And one cool thing that we're actually getting with a lot of newer games coming out is XESS Frame Generation. So it's Intel's version of Frame Gen, specifically designed for their ARC cards, be it an iGPU or dedicated GPU. Right now I have access to a build of F1 2024 that supports XESS Frame Generation. So I ran the built-in benchmark with and without it. Over on the left-hand side, we've got Frame Gen enabled. Our average 122, maximum 135, and our minimum of 107. Over on the right-hand side, no Frame Gen, same settings, 1440p, ultra high. We got an average of 70, maximum of 79, and a minimum of 62. So with XESS Frame Gen enabled, we gained 52 FPS, and I'm actually super excited about Intel's Frame Gen coming to more games. It's still a bit early, but I hope we do get a ton in the future. Next one I wanted to test was Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, 1440p, very high, and we did take XESS to balanced. I think this game needs a little more optimization. Even on my higher end systems, I do notice that at those higher settings, I get some bad frame dips every once in a while. But on the B580, paired up with this 7940HX, we came out with an average of 82 FPS. Next one I wanted to test was God of War Ragnarok, 1440p, Ultra with XESS set to quality. I would probably take this to balanced. If you just take a look in the top left-hand corner, I mean, we're still over that 60 mark. We're seeing an average of around 73. But with this set at balanced, we can actually get an average of around 82. And in my opinion, with a good display, it's really hard to tell the difference between quality and balanced. Of course, we had to check out Cyberpunk 2077, 1440p, Ultra, XESS set to quality. This game does run really well on the B580, and I'll tell you what, even though we don't have Intel's frame generation built in with this game just yet, we do have FSR3, which is AMD's frame gen. With that enabled here on the B580, you can actually take this up to Ray Tracing Ultra 1440p and see an average of around 65 FPS. And the last one I have here is Spider-Man Remastered. You're going to see the same kind of performance out of Spider-Man Miles Morales. 1440p, very high, no scaling. So we're at a true 1440p. Seeing averages in the mid-80s here. Up top, when you're away from the ground, you'll see it over 100, but this is really playable without any kind of frame gen or scaling going on. Given that this case is on the much lower end or the cheaper side of things, it doesn't have a lot of ventilation. And the one thing I was really concerned about were CPU temps out of this 7940HX. I wasn't really worried about GPU, but through all of my testing, I was running hardware info in the background. CPU temps on average while gaming, 75.6 degrees Celsius, and the maximum it hit was 83.4. That's just what hardware info has given me. I'm sure we could probably make this thing thermal throttle if we just stressed it out for a long period of time, but while gaming, it's doing a decent job. And I could go in and up that curve if I wanted to stay a little cooler, but we're not hitting thermal throttle here, so I'm not really worried about it. And the GPU temps here with the B580 look great. On average, 60. We only hit a maximum of 73 through all of my testing. Overall, not a bad little setup, and it would have been really nice to go with the smaller case, but with these cards coming in at, I guess the smallest right now that I've seen for the B580 is 280 millimeters, the one I have here, and I really haven't seen any of those under that $40 price tag, and I really don't like spending a lot on the case, because for me, I mean, it's not about the looks of the PC. I know some people out there really want something that looks super flashy, lots of RGB. For me, it's really about the performance, and for what we've got here, I think this is a great performing small form factor PC. And if you want to put something like this together, I will leave links for everything I used in the description below. And if there's anything else you want to see running on this, let me know in the comments. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. And like always, thanks for watching.